So it is the second Sunday in January, so how are you doing off to a new year? Feeling good? Anybody make any resolutions? How's that coming along? It's as if one woman said, I began the new year with bold resolutions and good intentions, and then all of my habits with great seniority take over. Do you have any habits with seniority? Yeah. It's been said that we are creatures of habit. And it's also been said that we are the likeness and the image of God. And so how do we live in this world as all of those things, creatures of habit? And then we are also, Einstein said that what we call common sense is just the culmination of everything we gathered before the age of 18. that we are, each of us are the culmination of our life's experiences, of our individual beliefs, that we are an outpicturing of our unique life experiences and how we believe, our take on life, so to speak. So we are a creature of habit. We're the culmination of our personal beliefs and unique experiences, and we are the likeness and image of God. And so in the midst of all of that, the question becomes, how do we show up? Are we showing up? Because how we show up is incredibly, incredibly important. I've told this story before about I had the privilege to live and work. I was a minister of the Unity Church on Maui. And when I lived in Hawaii, I wanted to understand the language and be able to at least pronounce the street on which I lived. And so I took a Hawaiian language and cultural class. And the first night, this Hawaiian kumu, very powerful man, came in and did a blessing of the room. And he went and he wrote two words on the board, kama'aina and malahini, and drew a line down the middle. And he told the class, line up. And so we all lined up. And then he said, now go and write your name under the appropriate heading. I was the second one in line. And the person in front of me looked very Polynesian, and he wrote his name under Kama'aina. And I thought, well, I have no idea. So I wrote my name on the line because I didn't know which one I was. And the kumu just looked at me and kind of smiled a little bit, and I felt like I was back in the third grade, like I did something wrong. But funny enough, the people behind me, when it was all said and done, there were more names on the line down the middle. None of us knew because we didn't know the two choices. And he went on to explain that Kama is child, Aina is the land, and if you are Kama Aina, you are a child of the land. And he said in Hawaii, we believe all people are people of the land, children of the land. And if you are a child of the land, then you will show up accordingly. You will respect the land. You will know the resources of the land are here to support you, and you will love and honor. He said, now if you're Malahini, that means you're a stranger or a visitor. So we welcome you to visit, but don't mess up our island while you're here. But I thought, wow, that'll preach, because who you know yourself to be, he went on to say, who you know yourself to be is going to determine how you show up on this island. But I thought it's far bigger than that, because who we know ourselves to be determines how we show up in life. Who we know ourselves to be determines what we believe is possible for us. Who we know ourselves to be determines what we believe is available to us while we're here. And so all of us in different ways live from being a creature of habit, where these unconscious habits and worn out beliefs may still be dictating how we show up in our life. Have you ever run into your own self and said, oh my gosh, I've got to change, that I can change? And so we're all growing into the awareness of who we are. And for me, the beginning of the year is the opportune time when it's sort of an energy of newness. It's an energy of hopefulness, of new possibilities. And so as a spiritual community, it's a great opportunity for us to pull out our spiritual toolbox, or to get one if you don't yet have one, or to dust it off. And so at the beginning of the year, I'd like to go back to Unity's foundations, that in Unity, we do not have a formal doctrine or creed or belief system that anyone is meant or asked to adopt. Unity is a philosophy. It's a way of living. And there are spiritual principles that are not exclusive to unity. They're found in many different spiritual traditions, but there are 5 spiritual principles that can really enhance the quality of anyone's life. And these spiritual principles have within some of them inherent practices. And so beginning today and then for 2 more Sundays, so for 3 weeks, we're going to look at some foundational principles and practices that I believe are the key to living out of the awareness of who we are in spirit, rather than unconsciously showing up as a creature of habit and sort of bumping into our own self, so to speak. So how many of you, I'm curious, how many of you have been coming to unity 1 year or less? Any unity? Good question. 1 year or less. Okay. How many of you have been coming 2 years or less? How many 3 years or less? How many 5 years or less? Anybody been coming as many as 7 years? 10 years or less? Anybody been coming 15 years? Do I hear 20? Anybody been coming 20 years? Wow. 25. Wow. 30. 35. 40. We got another, last service we had a 40. Anybody been coming 50 years or more? Wow. Wow. All right. Okay, you come up and speak today. No, Jack, I know you will. Sit down. And Reverend Morgan, I think, was born. And were you born in Unity? Yep. Yeah, so I won't ask you how many years, but it's, yeah, good. But now here's the thing. Whether you've been coming to Unity for 50 years or more, all of your life, or whether you've been coming for just a couple of months, have you ever been asked, well, what is Unity? What do they believe? Is it Unitarian? Is it Christian? Do you believe in Jesus? Who do you pray to? And you're like, do you know Cat Williams? I go to church for Cat. We have good music. It feels good. They're like, well, it's like you spend more time explaining what it's not than trying to say what it is. So going back to the basics is kind of helpful to really think about what is unity. Well, because unity, the word unity is a state of being. And I love that because unity is a state of being. This unity is a way of being. It's a path. It's a spiritual community. There's so many. It's a movement. It's honestly, it's not easy to explain because there's so much to it. And so Unity as an organization a few years ago said, okay, what is that elevator answer when somebody says, now what is unity? So I'm happy to tell you that there is an answer, there's a response. Unity is a positive path for spiritual living. Would you say that with me? Unity is a positive path for spiritual living. Unity is a positive path for spiritual living. This is part of our brand. It's the way that no matter where, what state you may be going to Unity, there's a few things. Now, Unity churches are all autonomous because there's not a formal doctrine, there's not a formal creed. I tell people, if you've been to one Unity church, you've been to one Unity church. They're all unique. But there's some things you will find in common, and this is one, that unity is a positive path to spiritual living. Positive meaning life affirming, that it affirms the perfect life within you. It's a positive path, and it is a path that this is a place where we come together so that we can be in the mystery and the magnificence together. That all of us have more, many, many things in common and many, many things that are not in common. But that's the beauty of a diverse group of people coming together. And the things and the reasons that we come together, I believe, are found and anchored in these principles. There's some ideas, some basic things that we may interpret them slightly differently, which I think is a wonderful thing. But to me, these are very powerful. I also think it's very poignant that we're talking about this today when tomorrow we will be celebrating, people will be celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message and his legacy. Because he very much believed in the possibility of a beloved community where all people could belong, where it didn't matter the color of your skin, it didn't matter your socioeconomic background, it didn't matter how you worshiped or where you worshiped, it didn't matter who you loved, but what mattered is that we were all children of the one Creator. And that's very much the philosophy that you will find in Unity. And so the next slide, Unity is a worldwide spiritual movement over 130 years old. Thank you for updating that slide. That emphasizes the divinity and divine potential within every child or every expression of God. Unity, as I said, does not have a formal creed or theology. If I personally had to sum it up, I'd use the words of Joel Goldsmith and say that we are about the allness of God individually expressed. That's really what it's about, the allness of God individually expressed. So just a little bit of background information. As Reverend Christie said, on Thursdays, I'll be going for the next 3 weeks. We'll take each of these ideas and go much deeper in a classroom setting. But in Unity, you will hear us sometimes refer to the co-founders, this couple called Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. Today, the unity that we experience was a natural byproduct of this couple's experience. Here, when they were a younger couple living in the Midwest, they lived outside in the Kansas City area. They were struggling in almost every area of their life. They wrote about this and talked about how they were struggling. They both had some health challenges. Myrtle, in particular, was very sick. This was the late 1800s. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Now, you probably know in that point in time, it was pretty much a death sentence. She was in the end stages of her life, diagnosed with tuberculosis. They were having financial challenges. They had 3 young boys, and they were really struggling. They needed help. They happened to hear of someone from the Chicago School of Metaphysics, a man by the name of Dr. E.B. Weeks, who was traveling across the United States. He was sort of on fire with what was called at the time, it's what we would call today ancient wisdom, new thought, but it was the writings of Emerson, who said, what stands behind us and what stands before us are no comparison to what is within us. What lies behind us, what lies before us is no comparison to what lies within us. They were beginning to talk about a power that was inherent within all people. So this man was traveling and speaking, and they went to this sort of a tent revival, and in the course of an evening, they heard him say, "You are a child of God, therefore you do not inherit sickness." Now you can imagine to Myrtle, who was sick with tuberculosis, who had lost many of the women in her family at an early age because she believed she inherited sickly genes. And have you ever been here or some other place and someone said just the words you needed and you thought, how did they get inside my head? Well, that was the experience she described having, is she got exactly what she needed in that moment when she heard him say, "You're a child of God, you do not inherit sickness." She went on to write in what now is published as her healing letters, Myrtle Fillmore's healing letters. She said, "After hearing those words, the light of God revealed to me that life was of God and that God was life." Now, in this very first sentence, she's telling us that her definition of God was blown wide open. Because rather than seeing God as a man in the sky, so to speak, all of a sudden she saw that God was life itself and that life was God. And she went on to say that the light of God revealed to me that I was and we are inseparably one with the source, and that we inherited our life from the divine, perfect source. What that revelation did to me at first was not apparent to the senses, but it held my mind above negation. It held her mind against the constant obsession and worry. It held her mind against the doubt. It gave her something to hold on to, and she began to say over and over like a mantra, "I am a child of God, therefore I do not inherit sickness." She began to pray to the organs of her body. She said, I began to claim my birthright and act as though I believed myself a child of God, filled with God life. I gained, and others saw that there was something new in me. They asked me to share it, and I did, and others were healed, and we began to study. Her husband had a healing experience as well, and they had others, and we'll talk about some of those in the subsequent weeks and also in the classes. And so from that, Unity was born as a movement of prayer. They formed what was called the Secret Society, today it's called Silent Unity. It's where silent meaning where people go into the silence and pray with people. Right now, there is someone in a prayer room in at least Summit, Missouri, out at Unity Village, that is holding people in prayer. If you have submitted a prayer request in the last 30 days, it's in that room with them. They're praying with it right now. For over 120 years, people have been praying, not the same people, obviously, but people have been praying around the clock with those prayers. So these were what we call the founders of Unity. So it began with a spontaneous healing. Charles Fillmore began to sit in the silence and receive guidance. Every area of their life began to improve. And so the people that had been helping them care for their children, the people that were asking them, pray, whatever you're doing, show me how, were seeing results. And so little study groups began to form. They also began to study religions from all different kinds of spiritual traditions and religions. They began to look at the Bible as a context from who are we as a conscious spiritual being. Charles Fillmore believed that the Bible was a symbolic study or a metaphysical story of us going from Adam consciousness, the consciousness within us that believes we're separate, to Christ consciousness, the part of us that knows we are one with all that is. And so they began to explore these things, and they published their thoughts, and they had prayer ministry, they had education. And so today, Unity is still the headquarters of these things, and our Unity Church is just one part of this. Having said that, again, there's no formal doctrine or creed that you're asked to believe. This is a place where we come together, and the emphasis is more on asking yourself, what do I believe? And as Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you? How are those beliefs working for us? And is it time for us to perhaps change some of those beliefs? So Unity has 5 spiritual principles that are not unique to Unity. They're found in many different spiritual traditions, said different ways, but all talking about the same thing. I'll give you some examples today from the first 2. In a nutshell, they are God is, I am, I think it, I pray it, I live it. Now, the first 2 have to do with the nature of God and the nature of humanity. They are philosophical, so to speak. It's about the nature of God, the nature of humanity. And then the next 3 have to do with our thoughts, our prayer, and our actions. This is where we practice. This is the practical application in our life. So we'll dig in to numbers 3, 4, and 5 over the next couple of weeks. Today we're going to look at the first 2, the foundational philosophy that says God, about the nature of God and the nature of humanity. So the first one, God is a condensed version of what we say every Sunday. Many of you know this by heart. We say, there is only one presence and one power active in the universe and in my life, God the good omnipotence. So every Sunday we begin talking about that there is one. That there's one power, one presence that animates all creation. There's not one God for the Baptist and one God for the Methodist. There's not one God for the Christians and one for the Muslims or the Hindus. That there's one source of which all of life is an expression of the one. Now, I don't know about you, but I did not grow up with that understanding of God. To me, God was more like Santa Claus, but a lot more serious. And there was this thing called heaven and hell, and most of the time I was going to hell. And so, there was it was like I had to persuade God, convince God that I was okay. And so in Unity, it's not telling you how to believe or what to believe, but to consider, look at nature. The first time I walked into a Unity church in Raleigh, North Carolina, I grew up Pentecostal, and I loved it. There was many things that worked for me until I reached a point that I started questioning. I remember when I was in junior high school, and I had some friends that were Catholic, and they were telling me about the Catholic Mass, and they started talking about Mother Teresa, and I was really intrigued by Mother Teresa because I certainly didn't hear about her in my church. And I thought, gosh, this woman sounds like a saint of what she does in India. And I remember going home and telling my mom about Mother Teresa, and why didn't we talk about her in our church? And she said, well, honey, she's not a Christian, she's a Catholic. And and she's not going to heaven. And I remember thinking, ugh, that just didn't feel right. And I can remember as a teenager thinking, well, how did we wind up so lucky to be the ones that got the right religion and the right beliefs? Wow, we're really, really lucky. Because I went on to say, but she's so sincere. And my mom said, yes, honey, and she's sincerely wrong. And I just remember thinking, wow, we are really blessed to be the right ones, or are we? And so it was like something cracked. How many of you had an experience that whatever it was, where you begin to question? And my parents are still in that particular faith, and it works for them. And so I'm not saying that one's better, one's right, one's wrong. I'm asking you to look at what do you believe, and how does it work for you? Unity is based on the idea of one, that there's one power that animates all creation, and that our life is sourced by the one life, and that the nature of this God is to expresses itself through all creation. When we try to talk about God, we must use words. And the minute you begin using words, you define, you label. The Hebrews were not allowed to say the word God or any word for God. And the reason for that, because if you say God is this, then God is not that. And see, there's a lot of wisdom in that. They believe that it was the unspeakable, because you can't describe it. But as humans, we try to comprehend. And so last year I did a series based on a book title called The Three Faces of God. And I love that because it talked about, if you use the life of Jesus, Jesus related to God as a God that was the absolute, in charge of creation, far bigger than Jesus was. So Jesus talked about this mighty, magnificent, unnameable God. Jesus also talked to God. He prayed to God, as if God were close and personal, like a father that would care. So he talked about God, he talked to God, and Jesus talked as if he were God. That's why he was killed. He said, the Father and I are one. If you've seen the Father, you have seen me. And his last prayer was, may you know that same truth. May you know that you and the Father are one, and that you and the Creator, that we're all one with the one. And he went on to say, and the things that I can do, you can do, and even greater. And so when we talk about the nature of God, the language sometimes is going to make it sound like that we're praying to this being in the sky, because that's talking to God. Sometimes we talk about God, sometimes we speak as God. And so this first point of that there's one power and one presence is just hopefully to open us to the awe and magnificence of all that is. The scriptures tell us that God is everywhere present. God is all power. God is not a he or a she, that God is spirit. And the scriptures say that God is love, that it's this energy, this vibration of love that is the most like God. When we find ourselves in that state of pure love, that's when we know that we're experiencing the allness of God. So the foundation is that there is one. There's one God, whatever we call it. We're not going to judge how you approach God, what you call God, what you like or don't like. You may be like the little boy who called God Howard and kept calling God Howard. And the mother said, why are you doing that? He said, because that's not God's name. We say, how, yeah. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Howard. Or my friend who does G-O-D as the grand overall designer, the grand overall. So whatever. I just encourage us to don't get tripped up on the names. Try a new name. But to spend some time this week thinking about what does it mean to be one with the one? Well, it means you can never be disconnected from your source. You can never be disconnected from your source. That wherever you are, God is. Because God, what does God use for creation except itself? That we are all an expression of God. This idea of oneness, as I said, is not unique to unity. It's found in many different spiritual traditions. And you will probably recognize some of these. From the Bhagavad Gita, I am the soul that exists in everything. I am the beginning, the middle, the end of all lives. I am mind dwelling in all living creatures. I am light, the eternal world. I am the one who never changes. And then from the Upanishads, all that is manifest is of God. From God, all things flow. From the Tao, the great Tao pervades all things and causes all things to come into existence. Can you see the thread of the one here? From the Baha'i faith, ye are all leaves of one tree and the fruit of one branch. And then from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, I am the first and the last, and beside me there is no other. And then if you go to the New Testament, Ephesians, there's one body and one spirit, just as you were all called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all things, through all things, and in all things. It's really beautiful and poetic. And so the next slide, Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, said it this way: God is the source of all, therefore I am an offspring of God, an heir to all good. Myrtle Fillmore, one of her favorite quotes was to say, as lives the flower in the seed, so lives the Christ in me. Christ being that perfect pattern of our spiritual potential. Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of religious science, they were Charles, the Fillmores, and Ernest Holmes came along right after them, and they studied under the same teachers. So this religious science or spiritual centered living and unity are very, very similar. Ernest Holmes referred to it as the perfect spirit in you. Raymond Charles Barker, who's one of the New Thought forerunners, said, you are in God, God is in you. There is no separation. There never was and there never will be. And Jesus said it very succinctly, the Father and I are one. And so this idea that there is one and we are all expressions of the one then leads us to turn within and say, well, if God is all that is, present in all of creation, then who am I? Where do I come from? You know, those are perennial questions that everyone asks. And to know where we come from, to know about our heritage. Do you know what the number 2 hobby in the United States is right now? Genealogy. Number 1 is gardening, just in case you wanted to know, I did. Number 1 is gardening, but the number 2 hobby in the United States is genealogy. Have any of you tried to follow your family tree? Anybody taken the test, Ancestry.com or 23andMe? Yeah, it's interesting. I did that. My brother and I did that because we wanted to know, you know, I have to confess I was hoping for something very exotic. And, you know, we want to trace these family trees to know, did I come from royalty or horse thieves? What were my people? And interestingly enough, it's Confucius, the family tree of Confucius. They've been tracing that for over 80 generations, over 2,500 years. So genealogy is certainly not a new thing. So we all want to know, you know, where do I come from? Where are my people? Well, if there's one power and one presence, if there's one source and we are all a chip off of that original source block, then guess what? Number 2 means that the nature of humanity, if God is, then the second one is that I am. That I am the likeness and image of God. Would you say that with me? I am the likeness and image of God. Jesus said, do you not know that ye are gods, that ye are the temple, the vessel of this Holy Spirit? To come to recognize ourself, when we come to recognize ourself as an expression of God, something begins to shift inside of you. That's what happened to Myrtle Fillmore. You see, she began to identify with her spiritual inheritance, with her spiritual nature, rather than just simply her human nature and what she may have inherited or she may had. Many of the parables, the story that Jesus used, the stories of the prodigal son and the different stories, were all that you may come to know your spiritual inheritance. That if each and every one of us could really comprehend that you are the likeness and image of God, that you are not, I don't believe, a sinner. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I have never in my life held a newborn baby and said, oh my God, you are so beautiful, but you poor little sinner, you're going to hell. I mean, we don't do that, and yet, seriously, we have theology that says that. That there's a big theology that says that we're born flawed, we're born in need of salvation, and if we don't get it just the right way, then we're damned for hell. Again, it's up to the individual what you believe, but what unity says is follow the nature's thought. If there's one power and one presence, and we're all created in the image and likeness of the Creator, then we are born an original blessing. That just like Genesis said, that we are the image and likeness of God, and God said it is good. Those words are in Genesis. And so when you begin to realize that life is about waking up, it's not that, you see, we can never lose our worthiness. We can never lose our inherent divinity, but we can lose sight of it. You see, it can be obscured with our beliefs. It can be obscured by what people have taught us. And life is about, as Ram Dass says, we're all born with our somebody training. That we go through this life of being told who we are and what's possible and what we can do. And then we start unpeeling our somebody training. And so our goal is to come to know ourselves as the likeness and image of God, and then to show up accordingly. And when we do that, life begins to really change for us. Because when you know yourself, if it's true, if all people are created as the likeness and image of God, if at the essence of our being that's who we are, then you don't have to earn it, you don't have to prove it, you just sort of need to excavate it, own it, and live from that awareness versus the belief that there's something flawed about you, there's something wrong or something missing. And so sometimes the question comes up then, well, if there's only one power and one presence, and we're all created in the likeness of God, then what about evil? What about that? Where does that come from? When I first came to a Unity church and they said this statement that we say every Sunday, there's one power and one presence, God the good, I couldn't say it. Now, much of when I walked in, I was blown away that these people were saying things that I had come to believe myself. But I had very much grown up believing in two powers. I was very much taught to believe in a devil, and that if I didn't behave, that devil was going to get me. And so for me, the first thing I could say and be in integrity with myself is that there is one true power, God. There's one true power, because I did believe that God was this ultimate power. And as I began to work with this idea, little by little by little, what began to happen, one day I had this image of like a building, and I saw this energy flowing in like light or electricity. And I began to realize that God is like pure potential, call it electricity, that can be used to illuminate this building or can be misused to burn down the building. And so God is pure potential. God is all that is. It is we who channel it for purposes of good or evil. And that's where the real responsibility comes in. It's really unfortunate that we can't say the devil made me do it. That you have to take responsibility. But it's also about getting to take responsibility. And that lets us know that if our very nature is spirit, is of God, then we can change, that we can be changed. And that's what the great news, so to speak, is all about. And so the first two principles, God is, I am. This week I invite us to come into the awareness of noticing places in our lives when we feel like we're disconnected. And that tends to happen when we get frustrated, we blame people, things aren't working out exactly the way we want them to. Some of you may remember from the 1960s, or if you look up this guy on Google, you'd recognize the picture, Rao, R-A-O. He was a Hindu holy man from Bombay, from India, and back in the 1960s, he said that he was going to walk on water. He believed that he had the power, he was a holy man, and that he could really walk on water. He was so confident in his spiritual power that he announced that he would perform it in front of a live audience. And so he sold tickets at $100 each. A lot of people bought those tickets. Bombay's elite turned out en masse to come behold him walk on water. The event was held in a large garden with a deep pool and a huge crowd assembled. And so he walked out with his white beard, his flowing robes, and he stepped confidently to the edge of the pool. And they said as he stepped to the edge of the pool, he looked up and he said a prayer, and a hush came over the audience. And then he opened his eyes and he confidently stepped out and he went bloop, 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 right under the water. And with those heavy white robes, he got himself out, and the audience was still quiet and his face was red, and he got up and he said, "One of you is an unbeliever." Richard. It's a true story. And I love that because it kind of points out the ridiculousness of us holding other people accountable for what's wrong in our lives, and how we give other people the power to reduce our spiritual power, and how through the beliefs and things that we've bought into that we're placing, you see, when we say place our power outside of us, that's the things we're talking about. Anytime something or somebody else could ever separate us from knowing and showing up as who we are, we're placing our spiritual power outside of ourselves. The final litmus test and the great way to practice that God is the one and that I am an expression of the one is to learn to behold every other person in that same light. You see, you can't hold your sister or your brother in the darkness and hold yourself in the light. So it's a real practice, sometimes a daily practice, sometimes a minute-by-minute practice. Go on Facebook, go on the news, see what's happening, and you have to pull yourself back and still say, no matter how this person is showing up, I see the light in you. You are an expression of the one. I see that. I know that. I'm going to believe that. So our goal is to create a space where all people can come into the truth of who they are. That in this game of life, so to speak, that all people are seen as sacred. The final thing I'd like to share with you is about a teacher named Vivian Paley, P-A-L-E-Y. Vivian taught kindergarten in the public school system for a number of years. And she began to observe a phenomenon. She said, I witnessed a particular phenomenon in my kindergarten classroom year after year. Without fail, a caste system among 4- and 5-year-olds developed, where certain children were granted the status boss by their peers, giving them power to create games, to make the rules, to determine who would be allowed to join the group and who would consistently be excluded from those games. You would hear it show up in many different ways of how the children would reject one another when they would say things such as, "Don't sit by me, stop following us, you can't be in this game, we don't want you on our team, go away." Anybody experience any of those as a kid? She said, year after year, the drama was the same, with only the names changing. Clara would hide in her cubbyhole during playtime rather than face the rejection. Nelson would run away from the other boys in tears rather than face the rejection. Angelo would withdraw into his own world instead of reaching out to others and facing the rejection. All of these because the kids very quickly learned 3 words, 3 very disempowering words: you can't play. And so what Vivian did, she created a new rule. So this year when the new students came into her class, they learned from day one, we have a rule. The rule is, you can't say you can't play. And she had worked with fourth and fifth graders to help her figure out how they would be able to do this. And so when she introduced that to the classroom, it was remarkable what changed. Studies have been done. They've followed those students. The parents, it says parents reported over the years that the children who had gone through the classroom where you can't say, you can't play, they never developed a habit of exclusion. They never developed a habit of exclusion. That these children, actually as they grew up, were puzzled when they saw children bullying or excluding classmates at their elementary schools. These children naturally became playground ambassadors, explaining kindness and inclusion to their peers. They stood up for children being bullied. She said these children realized in the game of play something that they took out into the game of life. And that is that nobody can tell you, you can't say, you can't play. That no one can tell you, you can't play. And so my hope in sharing that with you is that somehow the message will reach you that if there's a part of you that hasn't been showing up, a part of you that hasn't felt worthy, a part of you that has felt like you needed someone else's approval, a part of you that feels that it's rejected, that there's nothing that can tell you that you are not an equal player, so to speak, in this great experience that we call life. That each and every one of us are born in expressions of the one. And each and every one of us have the capacity to show up as the light of God. And each and every one of us have the capacity to not exclude the other, but to realize that all are holy. Kat, would you join me and let's go into this song. Last week, Kat shared a song that I asked her to lead you in the chorus. Again this week that says, yes, God, I believe. And as we enter into this time, I ask you to be willing to look at your beliefs. What are your beliefs about the nature of God, the nature of humanity? Can you say that there are no better than, no less than, but all are holy and all are equally connected? Yes.
Yes, God, I believe. 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 Yes, God, I believe.
I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. Our capacity to believe will open doors and close doors. Our capacity to believe will open possibilities or close down possibilities. As we bring awareness to the very fact that we have the capacity to believe. This week we go back to a basic question that has profound implication. And that is, how do we define God? And how do we define who we are as an expression of God? And a natural third part of that will be, how do we see all others? We open to the truth that nature reveals that there is a creative energy, a life force. Science teaches us a quantum field of potentiality. We may call it God. It's that mystery that when the seed is put into the earth, it grows. It's that mystery that within the seed is that perfect idea. There's the potential for that seed to become the mighty oak tree. And there is the potential within each and every one of us to bring forth our spirit, to to express the fullness of all that we are in spirit and in truth. As we choose to re-examine our ideas about the nature of God, we then re-examine what it means about who we are, how we show up, how it may be possible for us to show up differently. And what have we believed was possible for us or available for us? And are there ways that we still sometimes see others as somehow less than the image and likeness of God? This does not mean that we are not held accountable for our behaviors, nor does it mean that we do not hold others accountable for their behaviors. But what it does mean is that we can separate the person from the behavior. That we will always behold the individual as the light of God. And as we come to live in the awareness of who we are in spirit and in truth, we begin to live out the promise that I believe Jesus talked about when he said, "As it is in heaven, so shall it be on earth." This kingdom, this reality, would begin to manifest in and through us right here and right now. Stand up. Really allow yourself to be rooted in this.
Yes, God,
Lift your voice.
I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe.
Sing it out.
Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe.
Sing it out.
Yes, God, I believe. 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 Yes, God, I believe.
I'm going to say that our White House needs healing. Amen? Doesn't matter, the Republican-Democrat thing, I believe, is crumbling. That's a good thing, I believe. Because I all believe that we need to be in a direction where we're genuinely seeking a life that can work for all. And so I want us to do something that I've never done before, but I feel very strongly. Visualize the White House and send as much love as you can. That says, yes, God, I believe. I believe there's one power, there's one presence. I do believe that all people are created with sacred worth. And so we're calling on our leaders, we're calling on the leaders of all nations, those who are in positions to make rules, to not say, you can't play. To really see the holy and sacredness in all. That each of us can ground ourselves in knowing that and holding that. Yes, God, I believe. Together.
Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe.
Lift your voices now.
Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I
leaving this week to go to Nicaragua. Come on up here. Keep playing, Richard, if you will. We've got our first group of ambassadors since I've been here who are going to go to another country to spread this love, to say, we know who you are. You are the light of the world. And we're here to do whatever we can to spread this love, to spread this light. So to these bold individuals who have had to have all kind of vaccines and get their passports all brushed up, and they're going to work about 12 hours a day, as I understand it, in Nicaragua, and are going to represent us, we want to send this message around the world. We're going to bless you with this song. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. One more time. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Yes, God, I believe. Now, if you would join the hand near someone. Tomorrow there will be many people who will gather under a message of Dr. King that believe that we are one beloved community. So we're going to stand together now and to reach out over our 7 continents. We're going to reach around this world, around this globe. We're going to believe on behalf of every individual. What are we believing? We're believing that each and every person is an expression of God. We're believing that it is possible to wake up to that truth. And we're believing that as we do that, it is possible to create what Jesus called heaven on earth. And it begins right here. Yes, God, I believe.